I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Kalbach Shul. My name is David Schwecki. I run the website called Exciting Judaism. I'd like to thank Kalbach Shul for hosting us tonight. I'd like to thank Rabbi Naftali Citron, Julie Borla, Peter Atkin, and the board for welcoming us again. We welcome Rabbi Michael Seligson from the Chabad community. I've been learning with Rabbi Seligson for at least 20 years plus, and we finally found someone that will even speak about Chabad meditation, and I think Rabbi Seligson is probably the most qualified to speak about it. And thank you so much for coming, Rabbi.
Good evening. Okay, good evening. Topic is meditation. There's a lot in the world doing about meditation. This is one of the hot topics. I'll first discuss the background of meditation, how far it goes back in Jewish history. Our sages tell us, and actually Maimonides mentions it also, that it already was in the time of Abraham, Avraham Avinu, our forefather. The way that he came to realize that there is a God in the world was basically through meditation. Thinking about the nature, thinking about the planets, and about the sun rising and setting, and everything else that's happening. And when Avraham Avinu saw that there's a certain mechanism here, and he knew that ein, in Hebrew there's an expression, ein adam, ein davar eisas atzmi, nothing happens on its own. So he understood there must be a force here behind everything, and that is when he came to realization, as our sages tell us, yesh balabayis lebirozu. There's an owner, there's a boss, there is someone running the show. And he was the one that then started to teach this message to thousands of people. As Maimonides mentions it in the beginning of the laws in regards to idols, so he mentions over there, he tells the whole background, although the Maimonides is basically a book of laws, but he really gives the whole background before, which seems to be that this is also part of the laws. When we look further in the generations, we see also that the tribes and their brother Joseph were also into meditation. And as Hasidus explains, the reason that the brothers, the tribes, wanted to be shepherds, were shepherds strolling in the fields and really being free and relaxed, was basically because of meditation, because they needed to have a very easy schedule in order they should be able to devote themselves to meditation. And this is also the difference between Joseph and his brothers. His brothers needed meditation. That's why, his brothers needed to meditate, and that is why they needed a profession as just being shepherds outside and relaxing and not really having so much intense pressure through the hours of the day. On the other hand, Yosef was on a higher level. As Hasidus explains, Yosef was on the level of Atzilus, on a level which is completely removed from the creation, and therefore he was able to juggle everything together. He was able to juggle managing the palace, Pharaoh's palace, and together with that he was able to connect through meditation, connect with godliness, and uplift himself in a spiritual sense. So this was the difference between Joseph and the tribes. Going later, further into history, we find also, one of the codifier of the laws, which is basically referred to as Maimonides, the Rambam himself, when he opens up his book by writing about the greatness of the Almighty. So he actually wrote 14 sections, 14 books in that all-encompassing book, which is called Mishnah Torah Yad HaChazaka, the strong hand, the Mishnah Torah. This is basically all the laws of Torah, including laws that are not relevant today because they relate to sacrifices, they relate to the temple, and this is the only one that codified everything in a practical sense, the laws for everything. So therefore, when a person does learn Maimonides, it's like learning the whole Torah. And that is one of the reasons, by the way, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe initiated about 29 years ago to study Rambam every day, because if they study 3 chapters a day, they conclude the whole thing by a year. And every year, a person gets like a little brushing up and goes through all the laws of Torah. When a person learns 1 chapter a day, they finish in 3 years. So that's how the math works. So the Rambam, the 2nd chapter, after he is speaking about the greatness of the Almighty, the 2nd chapter is immediately, how does one come to love and fear of the Almighty? And he says the love and fear of the Almighty is basically by meditating. Meditating about the greatness of the Almighty. The greatness, the multiple and numerous creations that are in the world. And this all brings a certain feeling to a person. Either it is a feeling of love and affection, wanting to get closer, or sometimes if it is a meditation that makes an impression on a person, which is basically a feeling of awe, so it will actually bring a fear on the person. Every emotion needs to have its introduction, its inspiration, by using a certain meditation, a certain thought, which will bring the correct reaction in emotions, if it's love or fear. When we speak about meditation, there is also meditation before prayer. Shulchan Aruch in the Code of the Jewish Law, it says a person should meditate before prayer. And when we think about it, it says in the Talmud that they would prepare for prayer, they would prepare an hour. The sages would prepare an hour. Then there was an hour after. And then there was, so it's about 9 hours sometimes a day. The morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening prayer. And as the Talmud tells us, Halavai sheyispalel adam kol hayom kulei, that it would be hoped that a person should pray all day. So this is for meditation. The sitting wasn't just there to sit, and rest up. It was basically preparing for the prayer. What does one meditate about as an introduction to prayer? It is basically 2 thoughts, and one is completely different than the other. One is concentrating on the greatness of the Almighty in whatever subject one wants to choose to inspire oneself with a feeling of love or fear for the Almighty. And the other meditation, the other part of the meditation is basically the lowliness of the person, how the person has distanced himself from godliness, and wanting to bring out in oneself a certain feeling of wanting to connect. So in Hebrew, in Shulchan Aruch, in chapter 98, when we speak about in the Code of the Jewish Law, it is basically Gadlus HaKel, concentrating on the greatness of the Almighty, Vishiflos Adam, and the lowliness of a person. And bringing out in a person humility, which is basically, as the Mishnah, the Talmud tells us, called Kavod Rosh. Kavod Rosh means a heaviness on the person. And then a person's a vessel to stand in a state of nullification for the Almighty in prayer. So this is basically just a short overview of how meditation was always one of the major concepts in serving the Creator. Starting from Avram Avinu. And actually, when we think about it, by Avram Avinu being the first one that did it, this is where the whole Jewish nation began. I mean, he's the one that introduced as a God in the world. Chassidus Chabad is about meditation. This is one of the major things. It's inseparable. I mean, the word Chabad means intellect. And therefore, this is what it is. It's like amongst all the Chassidus Chabad is the most that concentrates on intellect, in intellectual concepts, discussing the most delicate subjects that there are, the most delicate subjects, levels that are in godliness, up till high up. discussing all the worlds, explaining them with parables, and that a person should incorporate it in oneself and feel connected to the Almighty. We'll discuss tonight, this evening, how much time allows, 3 different things. One is a very interesting discourse that the founder of Chabad, Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, said in the year 5570, which is 203 years ago. 203 years ago. We're already in 2013, so it's basically, it was in 18... Yeah, whatever. It's in 1810. 1810. So this is one thing. And the discourse begins with a very interesting opening. Inyan v'seder aveda be'esek hachsidus. What is the concept and the order, the manner of aveda, of the service, in being involved in Hasidic teachings? A second piece of material which discusses also concentrating the greatness of Hashem and how does one concentrate. So I'm going to do it, so I chose that this should be the second instead of the third, is a letter that the 5th Rebbe of Chabad writes in 1890, in 1870, was it? 1914 actually. In 1914 he writes a letter to his son, the previous Rebbe. It is the 16th of Teves. He writes this letter to his son. It is in the 2nd volume of his letters. And this whole thing is sort of a mystery. His son asks him a question. His son is 34 years old. He watched his father deliver discourses for about a good 30 years. Very deep concepts in Hasidic philosophy. And in 1914, he asks him, what is Hasidus? And his father responds with a whole letter. Basically, the first part of the letter, he tells him, I never delved into what is Hasidus. I studied Hasidus, I didn't ask any questions, I didn't do research about it, around it. Thank God, I was just hoping that I can understand Hasidus. That was my thing. Then the Rebbe Rashab continues and says, where does the question come from? Then he begins explaining how does one understand a Hasidic concept. So this will be the second piece of material. And the third piece of material, if we get to it, is a few chapters of a long discourse, which is basically, we can say, a book, of the 2nd Rebbe of Chabad, Rab Dov Ber, who was introduced very much on meditation. He himself would meditate to the extent that sometimes he would sweat from his shtreimel, from his hat that he wore Yom Kippur, sweat was coming down, and this was basically from the exertion of his mind. He was able to speak for 16, 17 hours, delivering discourses, to the extent that even before he passed away, the last night, doctors gave up on him. He was already weak, and they said that... but then one doctor said, he really enjoys very much delivering. Allow him to speak. Just whisper into his ear, you're giving him permission to